Set in the war-ravaged city of Hamburg, Germany, in 1945, the film captures a post-Allied victory period, where Germany had lost control of the war. The movie commences with a captivating sequence of explosions, symbolizing the climactic end of World War II. During her train journey to Hamburg, Rachel overhears a poignant monologue from a young boy, cautioning about encountering peculiar individuals and the remnants of a defeated enemy country. Sitting across from Rachel, the boy's mother advises her to be cautious, considering Germany's lingering Nazi influence. Upon Rachel's arrival in Germany, she reunites with Louis, her distant husband. As the couple explores the city, they witness the harrowing aftermath of Operation Gomorrah, a devastating British Royal Air Force attack that reduced Hamburg to rubble. The extreme destruction inflicted upon the city and its struggling inhabitants deeply affects Rachel. She attempts to inquire about Louis' well-being, but his evasive response conceals his true emotions. Guided to their temporary residence, the couple enters the mansion and is introduced to the Lubert family, Stefan and Frieda. The Luberts' house has been requisitioned by the British Army. Stefan, the owner and an architect, warmly welcomes Rachel and Louis. However, Frieda, Stefan's seemingly emotionless daughter, maintains a poker face, creating an air of detachment. As they tour the modern and lavishly furnished house, Rachel remains distant and cold. Stefan expresses his desire for the couple to enjoy their stay, while his own family is relocated to a camp. He proudly showcases the mansion's exquisite features and apologizes for his limited English, an apology easily dismissed by Louis. Rachel, on the other hand, disapproves of Louis's friendliness towards the Germans. From an upstairs window, Stefan gazes out and observes the couple walking hand in hand. Louis nostalgically recalls their honeymoon, acknowledging the less-than-ideal location but praising Rachel's beauty. In a moment of sorrow, Rachel notices a cigarette case adorned with their son's photo and finds solace in smoking. The sight of their son's picture evokes a profound sadness within her, and they both indulge in memories of the past until sleep overcomes them. Rachel awakens to find herself alone in the bed, as Louis has ventured back into the ruined city to inspect a grenade used in an attack on a British Army jeep, resulting in the deaths of 2 soldiers. Keith Burnham, an intelligence officer, exhibits a hardened stance against the Nazis and shoots one of the assailants. Rushing to the scene, Louis attempts to rescue the man, only to discover his allegiance as a Hitler supporter, marked by the ominous number 88 on his arm, representing Heil Hitler. The dying man utters those chilling words before succumbing to his injuries. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Rachel, overwhelmed by her emotions, decides to search through Louis's luggage, reminiscing about their son as she touches his sweater. Wandering around, she encounters Frieda and attempts to engage her in conversation about her reading preferences, only to be rebuffed. Stefan explains that Frieda does not listen to him, solely because he is her father. Rachel then proceeds to explore the living room, inspecting various items. The maid invites her for breakfast in German, but Rachel, unable to understand, politely declines. The maid apologizes and serves her coffee. Eventually, Louis returns to the mansion after attending to an emergency and joins Rachel for breakfast, their silent connection now laced with a deeper understanding of the haunting realities that unfold in War-Torn Hamburg. Louis inquires about Rachel's night, and she expresses her longing for privacy and time alone together. Louis proposes the idea of allowing the Luberts to stay in the mansion, occupying the top floor. However, Rachel objects, feeling uneasy with the suggestion and desiring exclusive time with her husband. Louis suggests that Rachel's discomfort stems from the fact that the Luberts are Germans. He explains that witnessing the suffering and starvation outside makes him feel guilty, and he sees letting the Luberts stay as an attempt to alleviate that guilt. Rachel becomes angry because this arrangement was not part of their original plan. Louis defends himself, stating that nothing is going according to plan in the chaotic post-war situation. Frieda watches the couple from above as they converse with Stefan, and eventually, they reach an agreement to let the Luberts stay on the top floor. Rachel asks the maid for assistance in rearranging the house, particularly with the plants, but due to the language barrier and underlying animosity, Rachel and the staff struggle to understand each other. To worsen matters, Rachel believes they are mocking her when they speak in German. Rachel sits in a reclining chair, and Stefan interrupts her, engaging in a discussion about the chair's philosophy. Rachel disengages from the conversation and advises Stefan not to wander around the house since they no longer own it. She asks him to relay any requests from his daughter to the maid. Stefan gives Rachel the keys, acknowledging her as the lady of the house. During dinner, Rachel says something in German to the maid, who smiles in response. Rachel complains to her husband that the maid is smirking again, but Louis explains that it's because Rachel said, "You're delicious," instead of "It's delicious." They laugh about the misunderstanding, and Rachel expresses disbelief at Louis for maintaining the same routine as before. Louis avoids discussing the topic and dismisses Rachel's concerns. Angry, Rachel retreats to her room, sulking while taking a bath. In the city, Rachel meets up with a British friend and vents about her husband acting like a saint after the war and how he treats the Luberts. Her friend warns her that the Germans should be kept beneath them and not considered equals, as the Germans harbor resentment towards the British. Rachel returns to the mansion, where Stefan greets her, but she ignores him. Inside the house, Frida is playing the piano, and Rachel finds amusement in the teenage girl's performance. However, Stefan arrives and scolds Frida, instructing her to get off the piano since it is no longer theirs. Frida displays a typical teenage attitude and walks away. Rachel insists that it's okay, but Stefan insists that it's not, mentioning his late wife Claudia, who despised Frida's playing. Claudia died during the firestorm, a coordinated bombing by the Allied forces against the Nazis and their allies. Rachel insists on allowing Frida to play the piano for an hour every afternoon, but Stefan reiterates the agreed-upon zones. He appears sullen rather than cheerful and leaves Rachel alone in the living room. Frida and Stefan argue about the attic, with Stefan claiming it's still their house and Frida mocking him for being too kind to the British couple. Rachel listens to their argument, but since it's in German, she doesn't understand the details. Rachel observes Stefan chopping wood but receives no acknowledgement from him. Frida takes a bus and disembarks somewhere to perform some work, ignoring a call from her friend. Meanwhile, in the more devastated areas of Hamburg, Frida assists with search and rescue efforts. A man pulls her into a truck and offers her a cigarette. In the mansion, Rachel is sewing while Louis is present. Stefan enters the study and kindles the firewood. Louis is overly friendly with Stefan, but Stefan remains cold in response. The couple visits another British couple, the Benhams, where Mrs. Burnham mentions that the stains on the wall are remnants of Hitler's portraits. Heath, one of the Benhams, discusses a certificate that determines whether someone is a Nazi ally or not, which could spare them. Rachel asks Louis if the Luberts possess such a certificate because she does not want to share the same house with a Nazi. Louis defends Stefan, assuring Rachel that he is not a Nazi. Heath laughs, questioning how anyone can be certain that someone is not a Nazi. Louis insists that since Stefan didn't personally kill anyone, it doesn't make him a bad person or a Nazi. Rachel argues that they all have blood on their hands because they supported the regime. She confronts Louis, asking whose side he is on. Louis slams his hand on the table and declares that they defeated the Germans, emphasizing that they are the ones in control now. It doesn't matter whose side Louis was on. The following day Louis goes to the town center now occupied by the British. Stefan goes to the headquarters too where Louis is working. Stefan goes to the building occupied by the British for an interview to determine whether he should be given a certificate to avoid being sent to a campus punishment. Since he was an architect who built houses for the Nazis, he is considered an enemy. However, Stefan argues that architects build what they are told to build. Regardless of their political ideologies or loyalty, he is asked if he and his family were affected by the bombings, to which Stefan responds that his wife was killed in the bombing months ago. She was one of the thousands who perished. Heath asks about his wife, who came from a wealthy family, but Stefan insists that he and his wife had nothing to do with Claudia's family business, which had connections to Nazi parties. He'd show Stefan photographs of Nazi camps and the effects of the Holocaust. But Stefan claims he has never seen them. He is asked if he wanted the Germans to win, but Stefan answers that he wanted the war to end. He becomes visibly angry as the British officers try to paint him as a Nazi sympathizer. Back at home, Rachel confronts Stefan in their room, upset about a nude painting hanging on the wall. It's not the image itself that offends her, but she questions if the Luberts are using it to cover stains. On the photo of Führer Hitler, Stefan tells Rachel that it's easy for her to judge since they won the war and their conscience is clear, allowing them to treat the Germans like they are evil people. He mocks her and demands that they be thrown out of their own house. He even goes as far as asking her to convince him by kissing her. Rachel slaps him in response. Frida enters the couple's room and snoops through their things. She sees the family photo in the cigarette case. Frida follows the young man into an underground area where orphan children have gathered. They are starving and she gives the cigarette case to the young man. It is revealed that the young man is a Hitler sympathizer, a part of the werewolf movement who assassinates British officers. Rachel goes up to the attic and explores the Luberts' room, checking Stefan's house plans. Then she dresses elegantly in black and pearls before going downstairs for a dinner party in the mansion. Louis admires Rachel's alluring appearance. They are expecting guests in an hour. As they dance sweetly together, they are interrupted by the maid. They decide to have intercourse before the guests arrive. Rachel is preparing the mood for the evening, but Louis has an urgent matter to attend to due to protests at the headquarters. This angers Rachel as she will have to entertain the guests alone. Louis leaves to deal with the protesters. The protesters near the headquarters burn a German flag and Stefan happens to pass through the area. An old woman falls to the ground, and Stefan helps her, but he gets attacked by the protesters and soldiers. They also target the car where Louis, an officer, gets out and commands him not to shoot. During dinner they discuss the current events. Stefan returns home weary and Mrs. Burnham calls him in to ask for his opinion. As Stefan ends his night, Keith harshly plays the piano, potentially damaging the keys. Tension fills the room as Keith continues. Stefan asks him not to hit the piano keys harshly because they belong to his wife. The room falls silent, but Keith continues and Stefan is prepared to confront him. Heath breaks a glass and insults Stefan further. Rachel diffuses the situation and successfully convinces Stefan to walk away. The guests leave and Rachel apologizes to Mrs. Burnham, who feels she should be the one apologizing and senses something is amiss. Rachel tends to the wounds on Stefan's head and he mentions that she has been avoiding him. He intends to apologize but decides against it. Rachel says she doesn't mind so much, but then she presses the cloth firmly against his wound. Rachel then kisses Stefan and he reciprocates the kiss. They passionately make out and eventually sleep together. But in the midst of it, Lewis's car arrives and Rachel asks them to stop. They pretend as if nothing happened. When Lewis arrived, Lewis returns and asks what happened. Stefan says he was at the protest but not as a protester. Lewis shares that he was there too. He goes back to his room and Rachel follows suit, leaving the unsuspecting Lewis behind. In the morning, Lewis prepares for work while Rachel lies awake. Lewis notices that the cigarette case is missing and confronts Frida, but she hisses at him like a snake. Stefan and Rachel pass by each other and Stefan grazes his hand on Rachel, startling her. Lewis goes to the headquarters where he receives a telegram informing him that he has to go away for work, leaving Rachel behind. Rachel wants to come with him, but she is unable to. Rachel grows more and more frustrated with the army's strict rules and the culture of soldiers being distant from their families' lives. She is particularly upset because Lewis should have taken 6 days of leave after their son's funeral, but didn't. Rachel was angry at this because she felt like Lewis didn't care about their son's death. Lewis explains that there was a war and he had a job to do, so he prioritized it over their son. Rachel cries, expressing her desire to have their son back. Lewis tells her you can't do that and Rachel pleads with him to stay. However, Lewis doesn't listen and leaves instead. Later in the evening, Stefan is drafting a building design, looking civilized and handsome with his glasses on as the music plays. Rachel hears it and Lewis leaves the house and heads on his mission. Rachel finds herself alone with Stefan and his daughter. She settles by the piano, allowing herself to be swept away by memories of playing with her son. As she opens a composition book, her eyes fall upon the sheet music for Claire de Lune and she begins to play. Lost in the music, Rachel's fingers glide effortlessly over the keys. Unbeknownst to Rachel, Frida returns home and is drawn toward the enchanting melody. Intrigued, she quietly approaches the living room and positions herself by the doorway. Captivated by the beautiful music, Stefan too hears the captivating sound and follows it downstairs. Lost in the music, Rachel didn't notice Frida's presence as she passionately plays the piano, but to her surprise and delight, Frida joins in, seamlessly continuing the notes and keys of the composition. Rachel watches and as Frida skillfully completes the remaining sections, bringing the music to its breathtaking conclusion. Rachel reveals that her son's name was Michael and he died in the war. Bombed by the Germans, their house was bombed. She says Michael would have been the same age as Frida if he were alive. Rachel shares more stories about her son, how he would come home from school and become sad, crying when remembering things. Frida moves away from her, possibly feeling uncomfortable by the sudden crying. Rachel regrets that she didn't do enough. Frida coldly stares at her and Rachel breaks down. Stefan comforts Rachel by embracing her tightly, offering solace in his embrace. Rachel then heads up to the attic to check on the Luberts and invites them to join her for breakfast. The three of them have breakfast together, but Frida remains silent and distant, her demeanor icy. Rachel then proposes doing Frida's hair together. Surprisingly, Frida suddenly speaks in fluent English and asks what's wrong with her hair, followed by a sweet smile directed at Rachel. Rachel reciprocates the smile. Later on, Stefan retrieves a movie projector, and while Rachel and Frida continue styling hair, they watch a cartoon film together. Rachel and Stefan exchange glances across the room, giving the impression of a family. Frida's mood appears to have shifted, becoming more open. The movie projector eventually stops, and Stefan opens the window. Rachel and Stefan share another kiss, their moment interrupted by the maid. The maid leaves them alone, and Stefan departs, leaving Rachel in the movie room. Rachel makes her way to the attic, where she and Stefan share one more passionate kiss before succumbing to their desires and making love. Meanwhile, far from Hamburg, Lewis is away, searching for other British Army officers who have been brutally murdered. Lewis and the British forces in Germany are focused on dismantling the werewolf movement, a group of guerrillas that disrupt the Allied forces. During his investigation, Lewis captures a former troop leader of Adolf Hitler, the murderer of the officers. Lewis presents the murderer with photos of a boy bearing the same Mark 88 and inquires about his identity. The man claims there are many like him, revealing the werewolf strategy of employing children as killers. Lewis acknowledges this revelation and mentions that he himself killed someone younger than the boy in the picture. A heated exchange ensues as Lewis reacts to the Nazis' taunts, deeply offended by the mention of bombings and children, which reminds him of the loss of his own son, Michael. Lewis demands the names of the individuals involved, threatening to kill the Nazi if he withholds the information. Back in Hamburg, Stefan and Rachel embark on a hiking adventure in the snowy mountains. Rachel appears relaxed and genuinely happy, smiling and savoring their time together. Playfully, she throws snow at Stefan, and he playfully throws it back. They find joy in each other's company and eventually seek shelter in a cabin. Stefan shares his plans of buying land in the Alps and constructing modern houses there. He describes the envisioned house's features while tracing the outline on Rachel's arms. Stefan asks Rachel if she could see herself living in such a house, expressing his admiration for her rare smiles, as she seldom smiled before. Rachel confesses uncertainty about her ability to find happiness in that way. Stefan suggests that they travel together and start anew, even though he currently lacks the necessary travel documents. He assures Rachel that it's only a matter of time until he gets approved and they can begin anew in the underground. The Nazi boy named Bertie stares at the photo of Louis and Michael. It is now hinted that Frida gave the picture earlier intending for Louis to be targeted. Frida visits the underground and Bertie notices her new hairstyle, prompting him to change it back to how it was before, like a typical German girl. In braided pigtails, Frida and Bertie Shirikis. Louis confides in his chauffeur, admitting that his temper got the better of him. They share a moment of understanding, acknowledging that it's okay to feel overwhelmed. Louis reflects on how it's not the war that defines them and confesses that he has done things he's not proud of. He wonders how Rachel would feel about him if she knew. During a bus trip, Rachel sees children happily playing amidst the ruins. She goes to a restaurant to meet with Mrs. Burnham. Rachel asks why it's taking so long to get Stefan Lubert's documents approved. Mrs. Burnham notices a change in Rachel, that she appears brighter and happier, but Rachel avoids the topic, attributing it to her hair or the Christmas season. Mrs. Burnham becomes slightly suspicious, checking Rachel's shopping. Rachel buys a doll for Frida and cigars for her husband, but in reality they are for Stefan. Louis arrives back home and hears the sound of a piano playing. Christmas decorations adorn the house. He is surprised to find Rachel playing a joyful tune on the piano, mistaking her for Stefan. Rachel's mood abruptly changes upon Louis's arrival. Louis is excited to celebrate his new post at the War Office in London. He hands Stefan a document that clears him of any suspicions, while Louis is thrilled with the news. Stefan and Rachel are disappointed as it means they will be separated. In the underground, Frida searches for Bertie but finds it empty. She comes across a cigarette burn photo with an inscription on the back written by Bertie in praise of Hitler. Realizing that Bertie intends to attack Louis, Frida rushes to find him as they prepare for a dinner party. Rachel feels uneasy and returns to change her dress. Stefan enters the room and suggests that Rachel should tell Louis she plans to leave with him. Rachel remains silent and nervous. They attend the dinner party and Rachel asks Louis if they can talk, but he is called away by the general. Rachel is torn between Stefan and Louis, unsure of what to do. However, she appears determined to separate from Louis. Other ladies at the party invite Rachel to join them and Mrs. Burnham hints that Rachel will miss someone else when she leaves. Knowing about the affair later, Keith informs Louis that Rachel advocated for Stefan's clearance, leading Louis to doubt his wife and suspect an affair between Rachel and Stefan. Sullen, Louis takes Rachel for a dance and eventually confronts her about the affair. Then Rachel admits it is true. By apologizing to him, Louis questions how long it has been going on and how long their marriage has been over. Rachel confesses that it ended when Michael died. Louis warns her not to bring up the topic, but Rachel argues that Louis isolated her after their son's death, leaving her to grieve alone while he went to war. Emotions running high, Rachel becomes tearful in the middle of the ball. Louis blames himself, but Rachel claims it's her faults and tells him that he blames her for letting Michael die. Overwhelmed, Rachel walks out of the party in tears and Louis follows after her. They get into their car, but instead of the chauffeur driving, Louis takes the wheel. During the ride, the chauffeur is shot in the head, mistaking him for Louis, who was the intended target. The car swerves out of control as the tire pops. Louis exits the vehicle to search for the attacker and spots him fleeing. A chase ensues between Louis and Bertie, with Frida also present in the woods searching for Bertie. Rachel follows after them. Louis fires a shot, then points his gun at Bertie, who taunts him further. Ultimately, Louis chooses not to shoot and Frida calls out to Bertie. However, Bertie falls through the ice and drowns while Louis watches. Frida is horrified by the scene and Louis stops her from entering the icy river. They return to the car and examine the deceased chauffeur while other officers take care of him. Louis is deeply saddened by the loss. They drive back home to the mansion where Frida enters first and calls for her father. Stefan, Rachel and Louis are left in silence. Louis deeply regrets bringing Rachel to Germany and acknowledges that he cannot blame her for wanting to start over. Stefan scolds Frida for her involvement with the German guerrilla, and Frida admits to her actions. Stefan assures her that everything will be all right. Stefan then approaches Rachel, who informs him that Louis is aware of their affair. Stefan suggests they leave the following morning. The next morning, Rachel prepares to depart while Stefan approaches Louis, who still appears disheveled from the previous day. Louis tells them to leave, and Stefan remains silent, offering no objections. Rachel gathers her belongings and approaches Louis with a heavy heart. Louis asks Rachel about how their son died, and Rachel recounts the painful truth of his instant demise in a devastating blast. As Rachel shares this sorrowful memory, Louis begins to open up, finally releasing the grief he had long kept bottled up inside. He confesses that he didn't want to leave Rachel but found it almost impossible to stay due to the unbearable reminders she brought with her, resemblance to their son and echoes of his laughter intertwined with hers. Overwhelmed by compassion, Rachel embraces him, offering comfort and understanding in this tender moment. Louis admits that Rachel is the most precious and cherished part of his life. Reluctantly, Rachel departs from Louis, leaving him alone. She readies herself to leave, and outside, Stefan waits with a service taxi. Rachel joins the Luberts as they depart from the mansion. Back inside, Louis catches sight of Michael's sweater, and the weight of his grief becomes too much to bear. Tears finally stream down his face, allowing him to properly mourn and process the loss of his beloved son. Rachel, although not appearing enthusiastic about boarding the train, catches Stefan's attention as they find their platform, and he holds her hand as they proceed. However, Rachel hesitates to board the train. Stefan pleads with her to come with him, expressing his need for her. Rachel states that they only needed each other temporarily. Stefan repeats that Rachel wants to start over, and she confirms it before leaving Stefan heartbroken and in disbelief. As the train begins to move, Frida returns the cigarette case to Rachel from the window seats. Stefan watches Rachel, and Frida continues calling him. He finally composes himself and boards the train. Back at the mansion, Louis packs his bag inside the military truck. Sensing movement, he sees Rachel returning. Louis walks toward her with joy, realizing that she chose him. They embrace, reunite, and feel relieved. The movie ends with a sweet kiss shared by the two, symbolizing their renewed commitment to each other and the hope for a brighter future.